This is my history of Porsche ownership over 3 decades or so, and the excitement I've had from them, the unfortunate events, and just why I love these incredible machines. I'm not exactly the poster boy Porsche owner. In fact, the company will probably blacklist me after watching this video. My love for Porsches and really sports cars in general started in childhood, having, calendars of these exotic cars that I would draw on my sketch pad and get the little plastic models and put those together. And so I've always loved them, and there's something about the Porsches. It's just always been it's a very subtle styling. It's not as exotic as a Lamborghini or Ferrari, but they're beautiful cars. They're just more subtle and understated. In fact, they get criticized a lot for that fact. The car shows that Dad took me to as a kid in northern Iowa were muscle cars or old classic 40s and 50s cars. It wasn't exotics. So the first time I actually saw a Porsche in person was the one that Dad bought, and it was an old 914 4-cylinder. I think it was a 1.7 liter if I remember right, and it was beat to piss. I mean, somebody had just not taken care of that car. So we bought it for like $1,100, and I remember pulling up to the driveway in Des Moines to look at it, and Dad flipped the front hood and no engine. So we go to the back deck, flip that open, and there's no engine in there either. And it was because it was a mid-engine, right? So you had this little grill with the Porsche letters on it that popped up right behind the 2 seats. And that's where that tiny engine, I think it was like an 84 cubic inch, which is the size of what old Harleys used to be. It's nothing. But it was, again, beat up. It would sag so low in the middle that the target top on top couldn't even latch, because when it sagged, the target top ended up further back on that kind of rail back there. And so Dad ended up putting these, I don't know what it was, 2x2 or so square tubing, 2 big chunks of it across the whole bottom of the car with all thread going in the front and rear that he could tighten to pull this tubing up underneath it. And that took the sag out of the car, and we just did that until the target top fit on top. So you had, a low clearance car that now got reduced by this tubing, so there's almost no clearance. And it was a fun car, but again, because of its abuse over the years, my little sister was sitting with a dog in the passenger seat one time, and Dad turned a corner too sharp, door flew open, dog went flying out of the car, sister crying. The heater didn't work because the heat exchangers were so rusted in it. In first gear, it would stick so bad that you almost couldn't get it out. And in fourth gear, it would pop out instantly. So you kind of had 2, 3, and 5 in reverse. And Dad always used to claim that it would get a little bit light in the front over 70 or so. And I've had it faster than that, and I never noticed it getting light, but I got caught on freezing rain, like ice roads with it. And it was worthless, being a standard and so lightweight. Iowa was not the place for a 914. One day school had let out for black ice on the highway. So me and 2 buddies hopped in the car, and I took us out on the blacktop, and it slipped a little bit, and I didn't think much of it. I got to the open spot, hammered it, and that thing just started fishtailing across the highway, and there was deep ditches down both sides. Foxy, the kid in the middle, he goes, "We're gonna die." And I think I still got his fingernails in the dashboard of that thing, probably. But it was a fun car, and the thing that stuck out the most to me about it was how tight the steering was. The handling of that little thing, just so responsive. It was like nothing I'd driven before. And I was only 16 at the time, so I didn't have a lot of reference. But it was just incredible how tight that thing was around corners. And that's what really started, then it became not just something beautiful I saw in a calendar, but the driving experience is where it really started, and such an easy clutch and everything to drive. So despite that being a really poor example of a Porsche, it was still a fun car. So I continued driving, whatever car I had, the family hand-me-down or the Cougar I had for a while. So when I graduated from college at Iowa State, mechanical engineer, instead of going to the ceremony with a bunch of kids I didn't even know, I had a going away party on that Saturday back at my parents' house. And while there, Dad comes around the corner with this white 944. And just to see it rolling in there, it was like an Alpine white or something, if I remember right, but a pearl finish. And it had the chrome Borbette wheels on it, and it just looked gorgeous coming around the corner. And he handed me the key and said, congratulations. And I'm sure, part of it is because I paid for my entire college, so they didn't have to pay anything for that. So that's what he gave me. And it wasn't, like somebody rich went out and bought a brand new car for me. This was something that he bought as a salvage title. It was water damage from Colorado, I believe. And he bought it, he rebuilt the engine, which the engine had to come out the bottom of those things. And so he just figured out how to do all that. And he was telling me about like the precision and the tolerances of the German engineering of that engine. And then he was just fascinated by like how smooth the door opened and shut, like you barely had to push it shut and it would latch perfectly compared to, a lot of our cars with big heavy doors that they'd sag over time and you'd have to like grunt them to get them back to latch in place. My aunt had restored the interior and refinished it. And one of Dad's buddies had repainted the front end where it was kind of chipped and worn and stuff. So it was, something that he bought that was in the price range that he and people around him were able to restore and make a really, great gift for me. I mean, it was exactly what I wanted. And so that was my first car, was this 83 944. It wasn't a turbo, so it wasn't super fast, but it was only, I think, 145 horsepower, which these bikes have more power than that now. But it was just such an amazing car to drive. And it felt quick, even though it wasn't like super big power, it felt quick. And, it was a standard with a really easy clutch. It was well balanced because it had the tram in the back and the engine in front. And it was just really comfortable for what it was. I was very impressed with it. And the older ones, like the 83 944, I liked the way the curves on those looked better than the series after that. They had like the body line here with a bumper, and it was a little bit more angly, it seems like, versus the 83 still had the nice curves. I just thought looked better. The old Cougar I had previously, I used to take it out north of town past the golf course, and I could do maybe 70 around those, and that was white knuckling the wheel. And with that little 944, you could put like one finger on the steering wheel, and you could do close to 100 around those curves and not bat an eye. It was just, the handling of that thing was insane. I left Iowa and drove it down to Texas. That was my first kind of virgin run on it, really. It was, 2-day drive. I stopped in Oklahoma City, I guess, and got down to San Antonio. And the first thing I did with it is I took it to the dealership, and there was like 3 little electrical things. It was like the security system, the air conditioning, and the sunroof, I think, were the 3 things. And so they were just little electrical relays, whatever stuff, and got those all fixed because I didn't know shit about the car at the time. And then the next repair I had to do on it was because that was the year that El Nino had hit south of us. And so we had this massive storm system coming through San Antonio, and it created a lot of deep water coming into my neighborhood. And amidst doing that, what happened is there was an inspection plug missing by the clutch, and water had got in it and trashed the slave cylinder. So that Monday before work, I went in, hit the clutch, and it just went to the floor because the slave cylinder wasn't doing its job. So I had to ride the Harley in this torrenting storm of, being blown over almost. But I got that fixed. So that white 944 was my car in my formative adult years, although adult is a bit of a stretch. That was a time where we were living in San Antonio, and me and my buddies would rip up to Austin then quite often and go party on 6th Street. And, a lot of Red Bull vodkas, a lot of hot UT co-eds. And it was just a blast of a car. We'd go to like Carlos and Charlie's at the lake during the day, and then, Twist and Library and whatever at night. But it was just such a fun car. And then when it was nice weather, you could take the sunroof out and stuff too. Just really enjoyed the hell out of that thing. One day, one of my much more mature buddies who'd get in his Acura and put it in drive and put his classical music on, he was riding in the passenger seat with me, and we went around the 10-410 Cloverleaf. And as I was going around driving normally, I could see him reach up for the post and start to squirm and say, "Please, dude." So I just kept pushing the gas down, and with those tires, you could get this nice howl where you knew you were good, but like much more was going to throw you out, right? And actually coming home that night, it rained and we took a 90-degree turn and I did lose it and slid sideways, but it was, even in that case, the car was so perfectly balanced that it just slid to a perfect stop. It wasn't like the old 911s where you 360 out. It just came to a stop sideways, perfectly fine. The only thing I really did for upgrades on that car is I did a K&N filter one time and I tried, putting the stopwatch on the steering wheel and it made no difference. It's fun doing it, but whatever. I also put a Borla exhaust on it. I learned the hard way that you always tighten from the front back, not the back forward. That was a hard lesson. And then I had to put some bushings on it, some Swiron bushings. I'd been in Houston and with what would become my ex-wife, and there was a lot of really nasty roads. So in Houston, they get so much floods and water that the roads always end up with potholes. And so we were doing double speed limit over some of these side roads, and it blew out both of the Swiron bushings in the front. So I had to replace those. Found out the benefit of Dawn dish soap trying to get those installed. Any bad luck I have with the 944, I blame on the ex-wife, because about the time she came into my life is when all this stuff started going wrong with it. And one of our first dates, it was actually like the third date now that I think about it, that Thursday, and we were coming home from the bar. She drank too much, and for whatever reason, she couldn't find the door handle to open the door, and the window buttons were pretty slow, so she threw up all over the side of the door. And that should have been my first clue, like, she doesn't respect your car. Her and the car don't get along. You and her aren't going to get along, but whatever, bad choices. And from there on, it just seemed like one bad thing after another sometimes. There was the night that I was with a few buddies at Fatso's Sports Bar, and we were coming home, and there was a 90-degree cutout in a construction site. And it's where I used to just rip around the turn, but now it was a 90-degree with a drop. I dropped the two right wheels through that, and it ended up blowing one tire out. So I changed that on the highway and made it home. But when I took it to discount the next day, two of the wheels were actually bent. And those old Borbets were not in production, so I ended up getting the last one of them, and the other one, he said, hey, we've only got one other one left. You want it? And I was like, nah, I'll roll the dice. So I got what I needed and stuck with that. Another night, my buddies and I were behind XTC, the strip club, and car got broke into. They stole my faceplate from the stereo, my glasses, checkbook, and knife from under the seat. And I guess the alarm must have gone off and saved them from taking the whole car. We call the cops, and the cops show up. Well, of course, we've been drinking, so I hate to cause any more attention than I need. And the cops said, look, don't bother us for your car getting broke into. This is not our problem. That was very helpful. And the next day, I went to go buy a car stereo to replace the faceplate that had got taken. And I was like, I really hate to spend the $200, though. And then I started thinking, if I would have stayed home last night, I'd still have my car stereo faceplate, and I'd probably have the $200 or whatever I blew at the club. And I started thinking about how much money have I been spending? Well, the fact that I had no car payment, no bike payment, my rent was cheap, I figured up I'd been averaging $1,400 a month partying for the first year and a half in Texas. And I'm like, okay, that's ridiculous. So that's about when I decided I probably needed to start finding a better use for my money besides just blowing it at the bars. About that time, Forg and I happened to be behind North Star Mall out here. It's called Casey International, I think, and Kamal ran it. And it was just a little, European sports car place. And they had this red car that looked like a 944, but it had 928 headlight style. And it was a convertible. It was the guards red finish. Wheels were awful on it. Kamal threw us the keys, and we took it around the block and just fell in love with the car. And it was getting late in the year, so there was a Christmas bow on the front even too. But I thought, I just bought a house. I have this 2-stall garage now with only one car and one bike. And I knew I'd fill that space up sooner or later. It didn't take long at all, a month or two maybe. And so I bought the red car, had that in there. And it's a good thing I did, because about that time, I was driving on 410 with the white 944, and I came off the exit ramp, and I stepped on the gas, not the brake, because I had clear. Well, we have these frontage roads, and so I was in this lane, and there was 2 lanes here. They have a yield sign, so this purple Taurus in the middle lane was at a dead stop, and at the last fucking second, she did it on purpose, she cuts in front of me with no blinker, forced me into the grass, And most of those signs had a metal post. They were like the one-way signs. And I looked over at her from the grass. She literally looks over at me and just keeps on going and floors it to get away from me. Fucking bitch. And so I get up there. I found a wooden post, chopped it off, hit it so hard it stamped the ONE into my hood. And so while that car was in the shop, and they wanted to total it, insurance did. They wanted to total the car because it had a low value. It was an older car. I ended up finding some used parts instead of new parts that they could use on it so we could save the car, not total it. And while that was in the shop, then I had the red one to drive, so I still had some vehicle. So eventually I got them both back in the garage. I kind of referred to them as Candy, the red one, and Kane is the white one, which I know are both names for Coke. And no, I never touched drugs, but they also sound like two strippers' names, and I may have touched those. That to me, I made it. When I get up in the morning and go to work, I had the white 944, I had the red convertible, and I had the Harley. And to me, that's like why I went to school and why I had a job, is to be able to have these toys. And so I was on top of the world at that point. The 968 had worn out tires and some pretty ugly wheels, to be honest, on it. So I ended up finding a set of chrome turbo twist rims like what the 911s and that would have, and it looked so much better on that car. It completely changed the look of it. So I had those on with the new Michelins, and I did a drive out to Colorado with it, which was a blast. I didn't really get up in the mountains too much with it to really enjoy that aspect, but for a road car, I was pretty impressed for what the car was as far as comfort, getting up there and back. And a convertible is nice on the open road, right? You got the sunshine and blue skies, why not? About that time, I left work one morning, and it was, again, torrential rains. And there was deep water. I mean, it was, 4 inches deep, whatever, something like that, in my neighborhood, that I had to go through this water to get out of the neighborhood. So I had the white car, and I get about halfway through that little turn on Lomax, and that's about when I hear noise and the whole dash lights up like a Christmas tree. I could now see the sheen of oil behind the car, so I knew something was bad. I broke the oil pan, most likely. Saw that, and I also saw, as the water had kind of come down and level a little bit, there was it looked like a railroad tie in the middle of the road right where I'd gone over it. A tow truck showed up, ended up hauling it away, and I could just see the black and green rolling off the back of the flatbed. And I mean, that was tough to see, because it's like your best friend for how many years getting hauled away and going into a surgery. You don't know if it's going to survive or not. So I was pretty bummed out by that, to say the least. The Harley was already broke down, go figure, right? But it wasn't necessarily broken. I was upgrading the brakes. I was putting new calipers and stuff on it. And so I had to go to the store to get parts for the Harley. And I took the red 968. Well, when I went to do that, on the way home, the clutch line broke, sprung a leak on the 968, like 2 blocks from home. And it's not that, it's a $140 clutch line. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a pain in the ass. It's just so aggravating, because I just seen the white car get hauled away. Now the red car's broke. The Harley's down. So I've got 3 vehicles that are all dead right now. And I made the mistake of saying at least nothing else can go wrong. Don't ever tempt fate. I go out to mow the lawn, and a wheel, shit you not, falls off the mower. And I picked up the mower and threw it across the fucking yard. It's like, fuck it, I'm done. So I went inside. Well, I couldn't even drive anywhere to go get booze. And the only booze I had in the house was Everclear. And I was like, and the only mixer I had was milk. I ended up mixing the Everclear with the milk with chocolate protein powder and like instant coffee, and made kind of a poverty white Russian, a Siberian, I guess you could call it. And it was awful. It got the job done, but God, it tasted like shit. So when the dealer finally called and said, you need to come see this, I went to the dealership. He had the 944 up on the rack, and from underneath you could actually see a hole in the block and the lower half of the connecting rod hanging out. I've seen bent rods, never broken ones, but this lower half of the rod hanging out, and up you could see the bottom of the piston with the top half of the connecting rod hanging there. I thought the railroad tie had broke the pan, which That may have happened too, but what it really probably was hydrolocking it. The engine was screwed. It was already, a salvage title on the car. And so the insurance company totaled it. And I didn't have the equipment in my garage to be able to, drop an engine out the bottom and do all that stuff. It just wasn't practical either. So I hated to see it go, but I did total it. The night that it was sitting at the dealer ready to be hauled away, my buddy and I went over. It was already, totaled. So we went over and I took the old 968 wheels, those ugly ones, and swapped them with the Borbette chrome rims and then put those on eBay and sold them for a few $100. By showing other cars like it for sale and using the logic of, hey, it had a fresh built engine, had fresh paint, had a brand new interior on it, the exhaust I'd put on and everything else, new stereo system. I ended up getting $5,500 settlement for it, which is pretty decent, I thought, for something with salvage title. And so, of course, we picked up the check, and my buddy and I went right to the strip club with it, which probably wasn't the wisest move. No, I didn't blow all of it. We blew more than we needed, though. So the 968 already had the nice new wheels, and then I'd updated the Alpine deck in it with a newer one that was pretty good. The car had 236 horsepower, if I remember right. So it was like almost 100 more than what the 944 had. And it had a lot of power. It was a 3-liter 4-cylinder, which is pretty big, right? The transmission was just a little bit, I don't want to say harder to shift, but it just felt a little bit more solid, had more power, so I'm sure it had to deal with that. The thing that I didn't care for about that car, the only real complaint I had, is that the clutch was pretty heavy in that car. It's almost like they took the 944 and all they did is put some bigger springs or something in it without really re-engineering it. And so that was the one thing. It wasn't bad going down the highway. It's just if you did get stuck in traffic, it was a little bit of a pain in the ass. But other than that, love the car. Very fun car to have. As much as I love that 968, I started getting the itch for what most people would say is a real Porsche, a 911.
Subscribe to my YouTube channel below and let's celebrate turning fuel and air into adrenaline.